Oh, Zoom. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Horseman, data evangelist with DataVersity. Thank you for joining the latest in the monthly webinar series, Data Architecture Strategies with Donna Burbank. Today, Donna will discuss data architect versus data engineer versus data scientist, making sense of roles in today's data-centric organization. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them by the Q&A panel. And if you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just to note, the chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. To open the chat and the Q&A panels, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. As always, we will send a follow-up email within a couple of business days containing links to the slides, a recording of the session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you the speaker of this monthly series, Donna Burbank. Donna is a recognized industry expert in information management with over 20 years of experience helping organizations enrich their business opportunities through data and information. She is currently the managing director of Global Data Strategy Limited, where she assists organizations around the globe in driving value from their data. She has worked with dozens of Fortune 500 companies worldwide in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and speaks regularly at industry conferences. She has co-authored several books on data management and is a regular contributor to industry publications. Hello and welcome, my friend.
Hello, thank you so much. It's always a joy to do these and good seeing everyone on the call again. We always get a good turnout for these. So to jump right into it, if this is your first time on this Dataversity Data Architecture series, it is a series. Dataversity keeps all of the previous recordings on their website. We also do a link to that on our own website, Global Data Strategy. So if any of the ones earlier in the year look interesting, please go back. You can catch them. One of the more popular questions is this recorded? Absolutely yes. And it will be, the Dataversity will send that out via email. It will be on their website. And we look forward to having you join any of these other ones coming up this year if they look interesting to you as well. So what we're covering today, however, is that long-winded title of, data architect, engineer, data scientist. Oh my, which one when either you're looking to expand your career or hire to grow your data team, it gets very confusing. And in fact, the kind of the why this webinar came about was just so many questions I was getting from my clients and coworkers and folks looking for roles. There's just a lot of confusion. So I was answering the question so many times, I turned it into a webinar, and hopefully this is helpful. And so the good news is because so many organizations are looking to expand and become more data driven and have a data team and a data organization, that's great. It's driving demand. But like with everything else, that can get confusing as sort of new people are looking at this and maybe using words differently than maybe the folks who have been around the industry longer have. And as we know in data management, words mean things, right? So we want to make sure we're using the same terminology as we go ahead. So who might be interested in this webinar? Hopefully lots of folks, but there tend to be, again, when I get these questions, kind of two categories of people that hopefully they meld together in the right way. Either those folks hiring, I want to build a team. What is that right mix of skills? The second bullet we'll talk a lot about, and if you've ever worked with my company or, heard me speak, huge stress on understanding the business. And we'll talk more about that because data is unique. It isn't only a technical expertise. It is also a business. It is a business, it is driven by the business. You need to understand the business. It's a business expertise as well. And then how do you find those right people? Because the people hiring, they have a vision, they have an idea, and they want people who understand that idea and can help them take it forward and be technical, right? So I call those people, sometimes they're unicorns, right? And sometimes you need people just doing the building. So how do you get that right person? We'll talk about that as we go ahead. Also, people looking for work. I have these skills. Don, I'm raising my hand. You say that, and that's me. How do I position these skills so people on the left can find me? And how do I find that right role? And I've talked to folks, I do a bit of coaching and mentoring, and I got this job and it was called the data strategist, or I got this call and it was called the data engineer or a scientist, and I want to be doing data science, not data quality, right? So how do you make sure that both hirer and hiree and business person and supporting team get aligned and make sure we're talking the same thing. And what's the right company to help me grow, right? So I want to make sure, the business wants to align data with their business, and folks supporting the business with data want to make sure their skills are used effectively, and they're excited about what they do, right? You want to really be aligned with that company you're working for. So anyway, we'll go through more technical things as we go ahead, but this is often the folks I get questions for, and I guess, you know, a lot of folks are looking for work right now, but data is always hot, and I know all the people are also looking for folks. So I hope maybe this webinar will help people get together in the chat. Um, but we're not alone. I know we, in a good way, sometimes in data management are a bit self-critical. We're always looking to improve, but sometimes we're also a little hard on ourselves. We're not the only folks that have a lot of words that mean similar things. And I always think that as a consultant, when I try to go in an industry that I am not, two of which, finance, healthcare, think of all the terms. I know I need someone to help with my finance. Is that a bookkeeper? Is that a CPA? What's the difference? And what about a controller and a controller are spelled differently? I think they're pronounced the same, right? An accountant, those all, I can see they all have similar kind of things, financy things, but what's the right person for my company? And do I need one? Do I need more? To me, there's a lot of analogies with data. And a small company, they may be all the same person. In a big company, maybe this is 6 people, 12 people, right? Similar with healthcare, gosh, and this is particularly stressful because often you need these people when you're sick, right? But what's the difference between a registered nurse and a nurse practitioner, or a nurse, or a licensed practical nurse, or a doctor, or a DO, or versus an MD, right? Gets very complicated. And again, you're in a small town, there might be one doctor. In a large, hospital, you may have a lot of specialists. So really understanding that, and I guess healthcare, like data, has a lot of specialties, right? Someone who understands your teeth is not going to understand your heart, right? Maybe an overall understanding. And there's a bit of that in data as well. So it does get complicated. So make ourselves feel better we're not alone, or maybe make us feel worse when we're trying to get help somewhere else, because I know I get confused by this. I'm probably not alone. So, um, who are some of the role, and what does make it complicated is that I would argue, even in a small organization, successful data management, and I'm going a little more broadly than just data architecture here, because I do think it takes a village to really make data successful, because as I mentioned, data is both a business thing and a technical thing. It just, because data is part of the business, right? It's your invoices, it's your employees, it's your products, it's your customers. That's your data, right? So it is a business thing. So this was a survey. Global Data Strategy and DATAVERSITY have partnered together for the past several years to do a trends in data management report. And I thought this one was interesting because one of the questions, this is available on both websites. If you want to ever download this report, both DATAVERSITY and Global Data Strategy, you can get the whole report. But who is driving data management in the organization? Interestingly, it's often the data governance lead, which really is not a pure data management. That could be a whole webinar, the difference between data management and data governance. But that's often the folks kind of championing that cause. And Mark and I talked kind of before the webinar of kind of this idea of change management, right? And enterprise change management, getting people to come along. Often the data governance lead sort of plays that role of getting the business and IT kind of linked up together. Chief Information Officer, I actually see less than that. To me, that's one of the poorly named or evolving named term. Often those are the folks that aren't doing data, right? They're doing more platform and kind of IT things, even though IT has information technology. Generally, there's someone, and you'll see that's growing, that idea of a chief data officer. I have found, and I assume there's a mix here of people looking for roles and also who have roles and are looking to grow. Often that evolution from the lead data governance to the chief data officer, if that's something in your career goals, I see that happen a lot. And you'll see, and I have a comment there, that the idea of a chief data officer has grown each year. When we do this survey, chief data officer shows up more and more. Before, it was sort of a niche role. I know that the U.S. government sort of requires a chief data officer, but not all companies had them, and probably, to be fair, weren't in a maturity to really benefit from them. But I'm seeing that more and more. And if you are a data governance, if you're one of these people who love data and love tech, maybe you don't want to be writing SQL, but you want to kind of be a change maker. You're really good at getting teams together and driving initiatives. Often the data governance lead sort of falls into that, and that's a great again, trajectory to something like a chief data officer, because you will need to be an influencer, not just a only a doer. We all have to be doers, but the chief data officer really is kind of leading that strategy. Um, and I guess there's also a number of, I guess I'd call them supporting roles, right? Because this was a select all that apply. So for those of you who say the numbers that don't add up, they don't. It's a all of the above, right? And so you do need all of these. And I see this as a good thing. The other thing we've seen in this survey over time, as we do it year over year, kind of the distribution, it gets wider, right? So we didn't only have the data team, the data architect, no surprise that they're doing data management, right? But you'll see a lot of these are business roles, business stakeholders, CEO, COO, CFO, right? Those are business roles. But also more, especially what we'll be talking about today, you'll see the data architect, data analytics, IT, project manager, data scientists, software developers, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all valid. I think this is true. All of these roles should be involved. Are they fully leading it? Driving it can be a bit vague, right? But you do need the village. And part of this webinar is how do you get that village playing nicely together? Because that's often, we all know about silos. And that is a challenge of data, because data does take, you do need the input from all of these people, and people are complicated, right? So, and people have their own agendas. So that's why these change agents, things like governance lead, chief data officer, can really be instrumental in getting everyone driving in the same direction. So, um, there are a lot of roles. So as an architect, I like to break things into patterns, right? So I went into just four types of roles, and what they do. And this might help you, especially as you're trying, if you're one on the call trying to build a data team. They're different, and I'll probably torture the analogy over and over in this webinar of kind of building a house, right? Because architecture is true for building houses as well as building data ecosystems. And there's certain folks that build a house versus design a house versus maintain a house, right? I might want an architect to design the house. I need someone to lay the foundation who might be a contractor, and then later I need someone to paint the walls or reorganize it, right? There may be very different people. Similarly with data, there's kind of specialists, and I have seen both in building houses, but more importantly to this, in data teams. And it's hard, just like I said before, especially if you're not a data person or you're a business person and wanting to build a data team. What's the difference between an engineer and an architect? I don't know. And then even folks often explaining their skills don't use the right terms, right? But we can sort of inherently understand someone like building the foundation is a little bit different than someone designing the rooms of the house and all of that. So that's why it's very important with data. And I've seen people trip up by getting a contractor to do the, using the building analogy, getting a contractor building, laying cement, trying to design the house, right? They're just different roles, and neither one is good or bad. They're just different, right? There's also these governance and orchestration roles that I kind of talked about a lot in the last slide that are really supporting the governance and accountability of data, which I have separated out from the one in the lower right, which is own and use. And I see a lot of confusion about that in the industry, right? That we need to do data governance, so we're going to hire a data governance team. Well, yes and no. And that's fine when you say that. But then I also hear people, we're going to hire data stewards and data owners. And that's where I start to get get a little, that's not right, right? Because there's often a governance team, or I would call that the data management team, but I've seen both that are so, the data governance lead, leading the orchestration, the data governance framework, the policies, procedures, but also some supporting roles like data quality and who helps maintain the data catalog tool and things like that. Very different from the business, who are your data steward and data owners, who are accountable every single day for making sure that the customer address is right. IT shouldn't be doing that. The governance team or the data management team shouldn't be doing that. That's a business thing, right? So I separate those out. And then on the lower left is the analyze and explore, right? That who's actually building the reports and the trends and using data for insights and analytics. Or is this a bit of a Venn diagram, and can the people owning data and using it also be building reports? Absolutely. And we'll talk about that. But I think in terms of grouping it into the different responsibilities and types of things, I think these four patterns work. And we'll go through and kind of talk about the roles in these different patterns. So let's jump right in. So this is just a sample ecosystem. It is fictitious. It is not inclusive of everything that's out there in the industry. So don't go crazy in the comments if you might have a slightly different architecture. But I think it's indicative of a general pattern of very common kind of a reporting from source system applications on your left to analyzing kind of your ETL, storing it in a warehouse or data lake or whatever, and then into your reporting layer on the right. Um, Data catalog metadata management is sort of the supporting on top, so you understand the lineage and the glossary, et cetera. And then data governance is also supporting at the bottom, right? And what makes this complicated in this environment, you can imagine you're managing a team. You can just look at this and say this feels really hard for one person to be doing, right? You've got the operational systems. This could be your billing application. It could be I'm a manufacturing company. I have sensor data coming from my trucks to see how fast they're driving, and then tech support has log files, and then customers are talking about us on social media, and then I have videos of different, store floors and how people are looking at their product. Right, that is a lot of stuff. So there's probably a team managing each one of those, and then how do we bring that from the raw data? I'm kind of moving left to right. You can't see my hands, and I don't have a pointer, but kind of that raw landing in the data lake to sort of structuring and architecturing that into a way that you can have a more business friendly semantic layer to then do the reporting and analytics on the right, either BI reporting or AI, machine learning, graph, large language models, et cetera. And then, sort of in the middle there is your master data, which I see as a very special kind of data, which is core to both business and as an IT supported thing, right? Your customers, your products, your vendors. Many times there's a business team supporting customer master data, product master data, but we all know it's also a data management capability or data architecture capability of how do we match and merge customer, so that's master data is a very good example of IT or technical people, the data team and the business team working shoulder to shoulder to get that right. Right. So we'll kind of walk through the role supporting all of this. That was a mile a minute data architecture summary. There can and will be across the year deeper webinars. I think next month there's a whole webinar just on master data. I mean, that could be a whole course, right? But this is just to kind of put things in perspective of what are the types of roles that would support each area of this data ecosystem. And I do call it an ecosystem because I'm getting a little ahead of myself because this could be a webinar as well. But the exciting thing about a lot of the new technology and cloud and the new products available is that very much can be a both. And it's not like you can just have a data warehouse and that's the only thing you can build. You can have sort of a data lake house and data lakes and data warehouse and do some text analytics, and there's a lot of different patterns you can use and join these different technologies together, which is a great opportunity. It's also it adds to some of the complexity and types of the skills. If you are on this call and you are looking to expand your career, look for a job. I mean, that's the exciting thing about being in data. It can also be a little lighting a fire under us. Are we keeping up with the latest technology? There's some foundational things that we should understand, relational theory and database logic and things, but do we understand large language models and AI and some of the new things that are hot in the industry? And we'll have to, right? I mean, this is what I love about data is it's always evolving. The things that I've learned over the past, gosh, almost 30 years now, I'm just, they've helped me. They still are valid, but it helps me learn some of these new technologies faster because you've got that core base, right? But don't stand still because you can't be doing the same thing you were doing 30 years ago, right? So excitement, but maybe stress, why we work some weekends sometimes, right, to keep up with what's going on in the industry. So, okay, so let's go through those different patterns, right? So the first one is probably what people start to think about when I'm going to build a new data team, I'm going to build a new data environment, I'm going to be a data-driven company. What do I build? Which is fine. I love to build stuff myself. It's an important thing. It isn't the only thing, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go through. But how do we build this new ecosystem? And I've already brought up the analogy because we can't help it in data architecture to bring out the analogy of building a house or building a building, because there's so many analogies to designing and building a physical structure as with data. And we can kind of relate to that because it is a physical thing we can touch, whereas data can be a little bit more nebulous, right? One thing I want to point out is that when I go through this presentation, and I've made this mistake with clients, I can scare people because I'll talk about 8 different roles. Does that mean I need 8 different people? You may, but I'm just talking about capabilities, not headcount. And many of us probably have done this in the call. In a small organization, a small project, you may do all of the things, right? And just like with architecture, I might be building a shed in my backyard. I am probably architect or builder, maintainer, funder, doing all the things because it's a small shed. I can design it on a napkin in my living room, and then I can go to Home Depot and buy the stuff and pay for it myself and build it in a weekend, right? That I can do. But now that we're talking about a house or think of a apartment building, right? I cannot do that myself. I can't fund it myself. I don't have the skills to both architect it and lay the foundation and do the electricity and all that. So that's why there's whole teams that build these things and it becomes more complex. So very similar analogy to data. If you're a small nonprofit and you have one database and 10 members, that's fine. But I'm an international nonprofit or I'm the World Bank or something, right? It becomes much more complex and you're going to need to build the team. But sometimes it's easier to think of the shed as you kind of trying to process it in your brain. What are the things I need to build a shed? I need to design it. Okay, now I can apply that to a bigger. I need to build it. Now I can apply that to a bigger organization. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there. So if you are a smaller organization, don't get frightened away by this presentation that you need 400 people. You may need 400 capabilities, right? Not 400, I'm exaggerating, but just think of it that way. Do I have these capabilities? Can they be in one person? Can they be many? I would venture to say if you're a large organization, this should be several people, partly because it's a different mindset. And that's right. And that I'm hiring someone to pour the foundation of my house. I want them to come in and I want them to pour the foundation as well and as effectively as possible and get out and let the person lay on the floor, right? They're a task oriented. An architect might sit with me in my living room and go, "Oh, we could add a garage and we could do this." And it's more of a design, right? So that might be your data architect versus your data engineer. And sometimes people can do both. I had a great contractor when I did a house and he could show me the vision and he could design it and he led the team to build it, right? But in a bigger thing, you probably specialize that out. And I've found with data teams, sometimes that's where a frustration. You're hiring a builder to do the design, or vice versa. You're having the person do the design. They may break down and try to actually doing the building and kind of think that through. Okay, let's get into that. So here is that sample ecosystem again. Where do these different roles fit in this? Again, could be one person, generally it's more. So, but let's think of the skills needed, right? So when we think of the applications, that's going to be your ERP system, your CRM, your billing application, your student registration system, your facilities management, your order management for a sales company, a product company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or the people, like before I mentioned, managing the sensor data on your trucks, delivering your product, etc. So generally, that would be your application engineer, your system engineer. I generally see IT and data management as separate but related teams. And IT is really on that. I'm managing the performance of that application, and I may customize the systems to meet business needs and things like that. But I might be your Again, I'm not saying anything pro or con any tool or any solution. I will just give examples so people can relate. I'm your Salesforce implementer or I'm your Oracle ERP system implementer, and I understand the system and I help it keep it run, and we do customizations and upgrades and things like that. But that would be kind of in that application engineer type role. Often there's also, and I'm kind of doing this green as sort of IT, your data platform, right? So there, think of them. I'm going to go again, no pro or con any solution here. I'm going to go to Azure or I'm going to go to AWS. They may set up that system. They may be set up that platform and be responsible for upgrades and make sure it's performant and reliable. And that's very much kind of that platform, data platform engineer, sort of similar to that application engineer. They're trying to get that up and running and understanding it. Um, I would say in blue, in this, I should have put a key, I apologize, is the blue is more of your data team. And there may be a data solution architect that who holistically is looking at everything from the applications to the reporting to the data storage for reporting, the operational data storage, and make sure that someone is documenting, understanding, and orchestrating that environment. They probably work very closely with those folks in green, more of the IT, but they are more of that, big picture. Is everything working smoothly together? And we don't and I've seen it all. I've been around. We don't have three data warehouses doing the same thing or four systems that don't feed into the data warehouse and things like that. And how are we maintaining those integrations? Then in blue, which is the data team, I'm describing, the data engineer. And those are the folks, those are the builders, right? When I talk about the person laying the foundation or putting up the walls, they are literally building those data structures that should be aligned with an overall architecture design. But they're builders, they're getting stuff done. They're building the pipelines that are going to move your data from, source to landing or landing to your data warehouse, your operational data store, or however you're storing the data for reporting, right? Builders, doers, developing, they're writing SQL, they're writing Python script, they are in the weeds, rolling up the sleeves, building things. Slightly different. Again, these are roles, not people. Some people can do both, but I like to separate them out because those are unicorns that can do all of this. They are the designers. Think of the architect of a house. Do you want 5 rooms? Do you want 1 room? Do you want a mansion or do you want a shed in the backyard? And they design the actual data structures for data storage. And I can see why this is maybe feeling abstract if you are a business person who's just saying, who's my data team? I've seen people often forget this role because we say, I need this thing in the middle of the data warehouse. Well, I have an engineer building it. I'm putting the tables in, right? But often, oops, you forget that someone needs to architect the structure of the data within that, of how do I align with the business requirements. Is it a relational storage or a dimensional star schema? If it's a star schema, how many facts and dimensions do we have? Conformed dimensions, which is just a fancy way to say, if I'm storing product data, is it stored consistently so all reports are using product the same way, right? So I don't have it stored in 6 different tables, all called product, right? Which, the data engineer, I'm busy building stuff. If someone could tell me what tables to put it in, that's fine. Or someone to do that hard work of saying, hey, there's 16 different versions of customer and we need to rationalize that into one. That takes work and effort and in a way to optimize that performance. They may build those high level data flow diagrams that can help guide how we do the ETL, what systems go to what, how do we transform the data, and often data standards either for business semantics, which is, and I know this sounds really academic until you run into it. What do we mean by a product, right? You say it's the thing we sell, stupid. Or if you're like most complex companies, well, is that a finished good? If we sell component parts, is that also a product? Is there a hierarchy, right? That's a whole skill level. Is there a taxonomy within that? And often having the architect focus on that lets the builder do the building once we define that, because it's a special soul that likes to do that. I am one and proud of it, but that it is a different skill set than building the house. You're designing the house, and also the technical formats. And this can sound silly until you've been in the industry almost 30 years. And I mean, major projects have been held up by, do we use, I don't know, a 2-character country code or a 3-character country code, right? Or, are we doing things differently in the same way? And can we pick one and move on? What are the valid values for gender? What, can we get those right? And I've seen some positive traction in the industry. We had one client recently that said, yes, you can be creative, um, but let's not be creative about stuff like, is it M or F or male or female? Like, or we're using a 2-character or 3-character country code. Like, that's not the right time to be creative. I kind of give the analogy. We worked with a big engineering company once, and this really hit home with them. We use the idea of a Lego. Think of all the cool things that you can build with Legos, a truck or a dog. I have a friend who actually worked for Legos, and she used to send videos. One lady built a prosthetic leg for herself out of Legos. Like, that's super fun and creative, but you can't do that if all your Legos are different sizes, right? Someone did standards, and once you have standards, you become creative. But if that person building a prosthetic leg spent all of her time trying to find pieces that fit together, she wouldn't have been able to be creative, right? So I like to use that analogy because people are like, oh, don't slow me down with things like standards. I'm like, oh no, we will be speeding you up, right? Because things are actually going to get done. So that's the data architect. Um, a data architect, I sort of focused on that upper part, which is the data warehouse or your reporting or your ODS or things like that. Also, when we talk about master data, I kind of talked about that there's a business side and technical sides. Somebody needs to also design those master data structures, which then would also feed into your conformed dimensions of a warehouse, like that example of product. Often there's a whole product master data effort of, what is your product hierarchy, and do you have brands within products, and do you have components within products, and do you have item numbers that roll up into things, right? That's a thing that needs to be architected. And I've seen many companies, the past few years, we've worked with several large name brands that have grown very quickly, and they didn't think about this. And I'm not blaming them because I probably wouldn't either, right? You're trying to grow the company, you're just trying to get product out the door as fast as possible. But now they're at the point where their SKUs are not aligned and they have multiple SKUs for the same product, and they're trying to, I kid you not, you may be nodding your head or you may be shocked, depending on your personal experience. But the number of massive international companies I've worked with, that if you said, could you tell me how many products you've sold by region, by customer, they cannot. They cannot because they don't have a common SKU, they don't have a common set of customers, and it sounds crazy, but there's just complexity in that. So once you can make that less complex, so when you do scale and you have that foundation, I mean, think of Amazon.com does a really good job of their product hierarchies, or another one was Zappos, right, that sells the shoes. They did a data first design to make it really easy to find the things on the website so you can buy more and get others, right? It does help you scale and it does help you sell more. If you're a startup, it may not be the first thing you think of. So we often kind of get with companies who have grown and then are kind of too big for their britches. It's hard to scale to that next level because you have so many products you can't organize them. That's where kind of that data architect comes in. And there's also a data quality analyst, perhaps, and I may bring up this person again as it kind of links into that support team that helps with things like data governance. Business people should be responsible for data quality. If you have the wrong name of your product, again, I've seen that all. I've seen massively embarrassing things done with major brands because they launched with the code name or they spelled the name wrong on their line, right? Business is responsible for the actual data, but there's generally a team of, is there a data quality dashboard that can help monitor the quality over time? Is there a data quality tool that once you have some of these business rules, like, I don't know, we're using a 2-character country code, that can help enforce that or have drop-down lists and things like that. So there's a technical and a business component to that. This particular role is a technical role that helps support the data quality reporting and implementation of the business rules and things. Another blue role that is also, which is the data role, that is both business and technical, but this particular role is a technical role that is metadata management. If you're not familiar with metadata, it's a fancy word for the obvious things we all need, right? It's the definitions of terms, what a product is, what a customer is, how do you calculate total sales on the reporting side. It's the physical standards, like I talked about, that for country codes we use 2 characters, things like that. That's a business responsibility in terms of defining those rules, but generally there's a metadata architect, analyst, engineer, perhaps you could even call it, that who helps organize those rules. Often there's a tool like a data catalog or a metadata repository that should support the business and support the technical team, but somebody needs to manage that tool. And how do you create this, how do you organize that and things like that? So generally there's some sort of metadata analyst architect that supports that as well. So that is sort of when you think of the builders, think of the builder of the house. You have both the architect of the house and the builder, and I think it's both sides, which is the data side, which is the blue, which is both architects and engineers, and then the green side, which is IT, which can be really confusing to a non-data IT person because it literally has the word information in the name. IT is information technology, but they're really not the data folks. They're the platforms, the systems, that infrastructure type team that may have data skills, but really that is a different role than data, right? And I've seen folks kind of get confused to that. In this presentation, I'm not talking about who rolls up to whom, but if data can not roll up into IT, sometimes that's better, right? Rolling up into the chief operating officer, or, that type of thing or chief data officer if you have one, because it is unique in that it's very much a business and a data thing. It's not a purely IT/technical thing. So that's the kind of architect and build and maintain. But then we have kind of the analyze and explore, right? So that's the reporting and data science and things like that. So the greens and the blues have stayed in here. And the new color, which is that brownish red, is the reporting side. So I want to at least break out 2. There may be things in the comments. You may have others. I'm generalizing because there's so much as part of this. But generally, there's your business reporting, or BI, your business intelligence. That's your standard reports, dashboards, types of things where you have business questions and you You answer that through reports and visualizations. That's going to be your classic, how many products did we sell by region last year and by customer? The one still many companies can't answer because of data quality and things. Who are, um, what's the top product sale last year and things like that. Still very valuable, still being built, always new needs for that to explore, which is separate, I would say, from I will call it a data scientist, right? Where they may be doing more of your analytical models, your predictive models that might be, your business intelligence might say, how many products did we sell last year by region? Data scientists might say, let's do a predictive model for based on previous patterns, what we might sell over the next 5 years, right? We might be doing artificial intelligence off that. It could be either an artificial intelligence, a loaded word means a lot of different things. So I might put machine learning in there as well. It could be, I'll think of Amazon again, customers who, back to this product analogy, customers who bought this also bought this, or suggestion engines and things like that. And I would think, whereas the BI reporting analyst provides answers to business questions, the data scientist is more of that in providing insights to business questions. Not that there's no insights from a BI report, but it's more of that exploratory analysis. Tell me some social media sentiment patterns and things like that. Often a very different skill set, whereas a BI reporting analyst might know SQL, might know tools like, again, I'm not saying good or bad about any tools, just listing them for reference, something like a Power BI or a Tableau, or a Click or something like that, where they sort of are good with working with that structured data and building reports on it. They may understand a semantic model or facts and dimensions and things like that. A data scientist, maybe they're working in R or Python or SAS or or large language models and things like that. That is a slightly different skill set. Some people have both, but it is, again, there are different purposes and different tools and kind of different methods for that. So that's on your reporting side. So this was where it sort of fits together in a nice puzzle, where you have IT kind of creating that infrastructure in the platforms, the data architects and engineers and analysts really creating both that business and technical implementation. Then we do need, because data is both a business and a technical, and there's so many different roles, you do need a team or teams to govern and orchestrate all of this. So that's where this purple comes in. Sorry if anyone's colorblind on this call. The bottom one, this labeled data governance lead, I tend to use a lot of colors in my presentations, that really orchestrates what I'm going to call the data governance organization. As I said before, data governance is a business discipline supported by technical teams, right? And that's where that data governance has to be a bit of both a bit of tech and a bit of business. And I said before that someone like a data steward should be a business person. It's a data steward for finance who understands finance and is accountable for finance data. As an example, there's other ways to have to do stewardship. And then the data governance team supports that with some of this policies and procedures and best practices, and are there committees we need to make decisions together, that type of thing. So that would be your data governance lead to lead that. And then I would think some of those roles that I mentioned before in kind of the data ecosystem, I'm calling them purple here, which is that metadata architect, that metadata analyst, that data quality analyst. And I've seen both. Sometimes these roles sit in a data management team or even a data architecture team, whatever it's called. Sometimes they sit in like the data governance org or the data governance center of excellence or something like that, where again, they're not making the business decisions, they're supporting the business decisions. The business needs to make the business decisions, but you shouldn't necessarily being asked a business person to install the data catalog and set up the metadata classification and load the data in from your technical sources and things like that. So there are kind of technical roles to support that. A business person shouldn't have to build the data quality dashboard. They should be accountable for the data in that dashboard, right? If that makes sense. But I've just seen those kind of be merged in funny ways. So I thought it would be good to kind of spell that out. It's just a supporting role to support the decision making of the business. I would say, back to kind of my previous point, everybody in the organization, in this case is purple, which is the data governance, right? That The data architect is responsible for certain data standards, which is technical data governance. The data engineer should be using certain standards and best practices for their ETL and their coding standards, and you don't just willy-nilly move data from left to right, from source to target. There should be data standards and patterns, which is technical data governance, right? And I could list through each of these. Your BI reporting analyst should use a standard set of governed metrics that have been decided. But your business reporting analyst shouldn't decide how you calculate total sales to put in your annual report to be reported out to the street, right? They should design that dashboard, right? But they should be working with the business and using that industry standard. And when someone says, "Oh, I know that's the one we report to the street, but could you create my version so I look good to my boss?" They say no. No, you have to go through governance, and I only report on the standard definitions, that type of thing. So everybody has a role in governance. However, generally there's a supporting team that supports them. So on that note, um, who owns and uses the data? And that's the business. I kind of have them steering the ship because data is only there to support your business or your organization. Not everybody's a retail business, right? It could be a hospital or a school or a nonprofit, right? But it should be data supports the org and is created by the org. So that's why everybody in the org has a role for it. So I put these kind of roles, it's kind of dark purple and light purple around the edges of all of it, because what I'm trying to show here is these are the business people who are really creating the requirements for this data ecosystem and are responsible for the data within that data ecosystem, right? So I would say there's two levels. These are fairly industry terms. There's several levels, but two here that I'm showing that are fairly industry standard. If you look at things like the data management body of knowledge from the DAMA or Data Management Association or the DAMA DMBOK, if you're not familiar with it, they use these terms too. So I kind of stick with these. People do change them. There's a pro and a con for that. If people really hate the term owner because that feels like nobody else owns it, it's mine. I've heard it called other things, but I generally try to stick. These are fairly well known. Try to stick with the common names. So what's the data owner? They're more at the strategic level, or maybe if we just your managers or your directors, that what are the high level rules and policies and roadmap for your data center activities? Are we going to build a data warehouse? Is AI something we want to try in our organization? If we use AI, what are the strategic risks? Do we use it on customer data? And is there a PII or personal information risk to that, right? Kind of bigger picture, but also, how do we report on our profitability globally? How do we all agree on how we calculate that? That's kind of your data owner. Your data steward generally supports your data owners. Often they report to them, but don't have to. They're going to be a little bit more in the weeds. So strategically, the data owner might say, this is how in general we want to report on our products, but the data stewards might be actually involved in that calculation, or what business rules, what are the valid values for your state codes or your country codes or your gender codes, and argue through the pros and cons to that, maybe more detailed implementation of the policies, the detailed definitions. So more of the day-to-day operational doers, whereas the data owners are a little more the strategic management designers. But they both need to fit together and support each other. If there's an escalation or a problem they may need to ask the data owners, and the data owners might kind of drive the direction for the data steward. But those are pure business roles that are accountable for the quality and the definitions for data. Also, I kind of talked about the roles of a BI analyst and a data scientist. More and more, partly because of the tools have gotten better, partly because everyone wants to do data. There are business teams that do their own self-service reporting. I would say that this is great. You can't do that without the great. This is almost a more advanced thing without the great data platform that it has data structured in the right way, that has solid data quality, that probably has a semantic layer that makes it a fancy name for like the business layer of, can you drag and drop? And here's your definition of total sales calculated. I can drop it on my dashboard because it has been calculated. Or if I want to create my own, it's really clear that here's the customer object that's been vetted and is the master data version of our customers. And here's the product hierarchy that is the correct one that somebody, so it's probably one of the for the data management team. Hey, we did all this work, and folks just see it as really easy. They just drag it. Takes some work to make it easy. But where I see things go wrong with self-service reporting is often, it could be a lack of skills. You definitely people need to know how to join data and things like that. But often it's that the data ecosystem isn't quite ready yet. The data isn't good quality. It hasn't been organized to make it easy for the business. They really shouldn't having to be doing a whole lot of data cleaning and things like that at that point. That should be more upstream. And is there a data catalog? Do people know what this data means and which data terms they should use and things like that? So, but really valuable, that where the business can be drawing their own conclusions and doing their own analysis based on trusted data. So, that is sort of the different roles. Now we want to go into kind of the execution or the implementation of that. And that's where it takes the village, right? That to actually have a working, living, breathing ecosystem of data, it takes all of these roles. And maybe more importantly, I know this is kind of a messy diagram, but a bit on purpose, is those touch points, those ecosystem circles there where it's an iterative process. You don't build this data, just like you don't start your company and then you're done, right? You start a company and you run it over time. You have a finance team that's continually doing things. Same with data. It's an living, breathing ecosystem. And all of these folks have touch points, right? The data architect might send a logical data model to the engineer who builds a physical data model and then works with a platform architect to help roll that out on a data platform, right? The data architect might work with the business intelligence team to architect the data in a way for reporting. The IT team needs to set up a performant architecture that's scalable and has backups and all of that stuff to make it work. And I think the most important thing is that they need to work together. Where I see this breaking down mostly, sometimes there's just a missing role. Often it's the data architect. We built this thing, but no one designed it, so it's not fitting together, right? Or we didn't have anyone looking at data quality. But often, as often, maybe it's in equal parts, you have all of the roles, but they're not talking to each other, or they're not coordinating together, or they may not even know that they exist. I mean, we come in, I run a consulting company, and we often, because we kind of come in with a project to do just that, we talk to a lot of folks and we're like, did you know that Team X over here is doing something very similar? Or you have someone who's built a data quality dashboard, but no one's looking at it, right? It's that coordination. And that's often where that data governance lead comes in. Not only, it could be chief data officer, it could be all of the teams working together, but there should be clearly defined touch points. And I would even say SLAs or service level agreements. As a data architect, I am signing up to provide the data engineer a logical data model. I, as the data engineer, am signing up to answer that with a physical model and then implement structures that match that design. I, as the reporting analyst, am going to use these standard tables and look at the catalog to make sure I'm using the right definition. Right? It's just, it makes so much things easier. I sometimes, when there isn't clarity of roles, that sometimes there's a bit of that hot potato. I don't know. Someone needs to do it, not me, or pointing fingers, even worse. That person didn't do what they're supposed to. So just making really clear who does what and how things fit together can really help. So I do want to leave some time for questions, but I thought this last section would be helpful to a lot of folks, especially in an uncertain economy of I feel good though, but data has been around since the beginning of time. So data is always a good place to be, for a personal career goal in any economy, I would say. But what did all those roles mean for me? Which one of those, when Donna described them, was like, oh, that's what I like to do. I love to build things. I want to be a data engineer, or I'm kind of a big picture thinker. I want to be a data architect, right? So, how does that mean? I think I want to stress this more. The data professional now, and it's not a new thing, I'd say always, but I think especially in the past 5 years, this intersection of business and data or tech is really coming together. And it can be a challenge. Sometimes business people want to jump into data without the skills, and vice versa. The data folks kind of come up with data ideas about the business that may not make sense, but when done well, this is what I think is really fun and why I am still in data. I've said this before on calls. My first degree was economics. I thought I was going to go into business, and then I found data, and that was kind of fun and profitable. So I did that, and now I can do both, right? Help companies grow economically with data and bring up new ideas of, hey, we have this new business model we can do with this new data pattern, or this is how AI might help, or here's the risks of AI. And I would say if you're a data person and you are good at speaking and convincing, there are plenty of business people who would love to hear you, right? I know we get a lot of business that way of people either challenged by technical people who won't talk to them or talk down to them or talk with technical terms they don't understand. And folks, it reminds me of that earlier slide when I don't know. I need to go to the doctor and my lungs hurt. I don't know the difference between all these types of doctors. And I've had that problem, broke my leg. What's the osteopath versus I don't know. They're big words to me. I just know my leg hurts, and I think there's business people with data that, and don't you want that friend that, I don't know, I have a legal problem. There's so many different types of law that someone would just sit down and know their stuff and explain it to you in a way that isn't condescending, but just very clear. And I think of that when I have some of my consultants who are on the call. They've heard me say that a different way. Just think of that, like someone who doesn't put it in the business's terms in a clear way that makes it very, very understandable. I think if you're good at that, the world's your oyster in the data land. Because I work with a lot of business people who are very vocally frustrated by, I have these data questions that I know I hear in the news all this AI stuff. Is that right for me? But I can't get someone to explain it to me. So that is a great opportunity. I think the data professional, excuse my nerdiness here, but if you ever heard the god of Janus, after which January is named, partly because that's the god with two heads, right? He's looking into the new year. He's also looking back to the old year. I tortured this analogy to say, to me, that's a good data person, right? They can look at the business and understand the business, they'll understand the technology, and they can explain that and take action on that in a really clear way. To me, that's what's super fun about data. So what's challenging about data, but that's why it's a great opportunity if you do like to understand the organization and go, oh yeah, because that's how your product code should work, and we could build a system to help you this way and talk with the business and things. So, some advice, build on your strengths, and you, all of you on the call have different strengths or a combination of these. Do you have domain specific knowledge in finance, manufacturing, healthcare, or something? That is a great strength as a data person, right? Sometimes that happens naturally. If you've been in the business a long time, you probably did something with data and finance because they were the first folks to really do that. But that's something that if you can understand manufacturing and understand product code hierarchies in manufacturing, that's a great thing. Are you a good communicator? I know some engineering schools, even not just data school. I think MIT did a whole thing of how, think of these folks that are way smarter than me that are, doing, I don't know, I have a friend, she does neuropsychology and understands the brain and everything. And she's a very good communicator of how to understand and explain it to me. I have another friend who does genetics, and I was asking him what he did, and he literally said, I can't explain it to you. You wouldn't understand. Okay, they just call it, but a good communicator can use analogies, right, to really help things understand things. Do you love learning new tech? You're in the right business because stuff happens every day. You can't be sitting and say, oh, I learned SQL and I'm done, right? You really need to keep learning the new things. Are you a big picture thinker? Great architect. Can I connect these concepts of how all these systems sit together and draw it in a nice clear diagram? Or on the opposite, not opposite, but adjacent, are you good at delving into those details? I can look at the code. I can look at that nasty, gnarly SQL statement that takes up 3 pages and figure it out. And no one else has the skills or the patience to do that. I mean, all of these are great, right? And so also looking to expand your knowledge or any areas on that sample architecture diagram that are new to you, right? Have I not worked with all the different cloud platforms, et cetera, et cetera? Communication that can't do you wrong. A lot of the great people in the world may not be the smartest, but they can communicate effectively. Toastmasters and things like that are really good, that kind of help with that and expand your network, right? LinkedIn, DATAVERSITY, DAMA, are all great ways to find other folks that are like yourself that can kind of help you with your network. So hopefully it helps, especially in this uncertain world. Just things to think about, because I think each one of these could help any of us. I actually kind of go through some of this checklist myself as I kind of, what's next for me? What areas am I not experienced with that I need to expand? So anyway, think that through. So again, it can be confusing. People use different words. People can have different roles in it, but that there are common patterns. And if you think of them that way, well, who are the builders? Who are the designers? Who are the coordinators? Who are the decision makers that can really help? There's no one size fits all for any organization, although there's some similar ideas of governance and engineering and things like that. And if you are in data, hopefully that all of those different options should be exciting for you because you may want to switch from one to the other. I've seen it all. I've seen people who are on the business side and really decided they like the engineering part. I've seen engineering people that really wanted to get more into the business side and really, or a combination of both. That's all on the table for you. So a bit of a plug for the series. If you're interested in master data, we'll go a little bit of a deeper dive in that one, which again is a great mix of both business and tech in terms of getting it right. Bit of a plug for us at Global Data Strategy who do this for a living, or in all seriousness, often when you are a company scaling, hiring people to do these roles, either short term or long term, or even I don't know what these roles are. So how do I hire an architect when we've never architected, right? That's where pick a good consultant, right? I want someone building my foundation. I want someone who's poured cement before. But assuming that, and there's a lot of good consultancies outside, even us who are awesome, that's often a way to scale because you may not need the team long term that you need to build it, right? So that's kind of a common pattern. I'll have a consultancy help augment us to build the foundation who have done this before of experts, and maybe that takes X amount of people, and I only need a third of that to maintain it and evolve it over time. It's something to kind of think through. But that's been me talking a whole lot. So I want to open it up for thoughts, questions, and ideas. So I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Yeah, there's whole chat was so engaged today, and we have tons of
It was on
questions.
fire.
There's probably like 3 webinars worth of great questions here, which is always fun. So as I usually do, I'm going to start with the most upvotes. Um, who or what org, business or IT, would own the creation and build of the semantic layer, or is it a combination of business requirements provided to IT? I love this question, by the way. I think there's,
That is, we went right to one of the harder ones, which is
yeah.
probably why it is hard. So, why it was asked and upvoted. So, the semantic layer, for folks who don't know, it's the nerdiest word for the most helpful thing. Think of that as like your business layer. So, if you've ever used, a Power BI or Tableau type product, and you want to build your report, you have these objects on the left. You can draw. Someone has to create those objects or that view or common measures. So there were several parts to that question. Who designs, what those measures are? That's absolutely the business through governance, but who actually builds that semantic layer? I've seen both, some or several. Sometimes it's the data architect who's more on that business side because there's you have to kind of build a model for that should often mirror the data warehouse. Often it's sort of on the BI team, but sort of a lead center of excellence kind of BI person that would not just build reports, but they have to understand kind of the model to how to build that and how to create some of those common measures. So I would say those are the two most common ways. It wouldn't be the business they would create the rules for it. It's then architect kind of centered on BI or a BI person that understands enough architecture to kind of build but I would think if I had to pick one, it's probably a center of excellence type lead in the BI team that works closely with the architecture team. That makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I like your setup too. What a crazy name. It's almost like us
It
data
is, it's
people
terrible.
name things to just discourage people from talking to us.
Exactly. When you want people to use it. Anyway, I digress.
Um, can you speak to the difference between someone who's an ETL and database developer versus a data engineer? What are some key considerations to what are some key considerations to growing someone from an ETL developer to become a data engineer? It's an interesting question.
Awesome question. And this is one, and we as an industry just love to change names on things to make it sound cooler. And no offense to any data engineers, but I think that was kind of a data engine I've seen that shift where you used to in the day. um, we had database administrators and ETL people, and now we have ELT. And I would think ETL or ELT, one is, well, we'll get this in a different webinar. But they're often, I would say, it kind of maybe more. They are one task, maybe more. No, I want to say more junior, but I am responsible for moving data and writing the pipelines for that. An engineer, I would say, a good engineer is a bit more broad than that. And they may also be doing kind of some of the database development, maybe kind of that more DBA role, creating some of the data structures, maybe, and there's senior and junior engineers, but maybe looking a little more holistically at that might be my quickest answer for a webinar, but feel free to reach out directly. But part of it is just confusing because we changed the name kind of mid industry that didn't exist before. It used to be called different things, and they kind of rolled it into one.
Yeah,
That
awesome.
helped.
I think we have time for one last question. What technical skills do you think are important for a data governance lead to have?
Excellent. Excellent question. I think I would say with data governance, I've seen more success with a business-centric person going into governance than a technical person trying to go into governance because it's very much a people role. I think the governance has to know enough of what these things are, but doesn't know how to. Don't worry if you don't know how to write SQL. I would say something like the DAMA DMBOK or data management body of knowledge where you know how these things fit together, maybe with a little bit heavy on things like metadata management or data quality, but know all of the other things at a higher level would be good. So you shouldn't have to be rolling up your sleeves, but if you did roll up your sleeves, it would probably be a little bit more into that the data quality and metadata. That makes sense.
I totally agree with that, but most of my success, Donna, has been communication and data governance lead.
Oh,
So
I
there
would
you have it,
absolutely
right?
agree. Just that the question said technical, but yeah, I would
Yeah,
think
technical skills, yeah.
that's where I would agree with you because that's why I've seen more success with business people, business eccentric, because you're more of a coordinator or a change maker with
Mhm.
governance, but you have to know enough what these things are that you're managing. Like a good project manager is often a good governance person because they can kind of get the stuff that's being done and how the people work together. But yeah, I
Mm.
agree with you. It's very much a people role.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have time for. We're actually a little bit over time because we got
Uh-oh,
excited. But I mean,
you
these are fun.
do.
So thank you, chat, for being so electric and engaged. And there was like a side debate going on in chat too, which is amazing. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. And thank you so much, Donna, for this excellent presentation. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.